Rich man hires nurse to take care of his sick son. One day he came home early from work, unannounced, and was shocked by the scene he just saw. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. And of the hospital doors slammed shut with a sharp thud, and Mariana, a dedicated and kind-hearted nurse, felt her heart race faster than usual. That morning, something felt different in the air. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she could sense it in every corner of the hospital, as if everything were on the verge of changing. "I'll remember this day forever," she thought, unaware that her words would turn out to be more accurate than she could imagine. It was just another Tuesday at the small-town hospital, but today something special was about to happen. Mariana, known for her calm and professionalism, was going about her usual shift when the hospital director asked her to take on a very particular case. Lucas, an 8-year-old boy, was being admitted for an urgent and high-risk treatment. Mariana didn't know it yet, but this boy would change her life forever. Lucas had a rare illness, a heart condition that often kept him in the hospital. His father, Samuel, a successful businessman, was completely overwhelmed by the situation. After the death of his wife Laura, Samuel had dedicated himself entirely to his son, leaving no room for anything else in his life. His world revolved around Lucas, and he did everything he could to keep him safe, even though his own grief over losing Laura kept him in a constant internal battle. The first meeting between Mariana and Samuel was brief, but significant. Samuel arrived with his son in his arms, his face tense and worried. Mariana introduced herself with a warm smile, trying to reassure him, even though she knew those smiles didn't always have the power to calm a father terrified for his son's health. Lucas, frail and weak, could barely keep his eyes open, but when their gazes met, something in the air seemed to shift, as if an instant connection had been made. "Everything's going to be okay, Samuel," Mariana said, with a confidence she didn't fully feel but knew he needed to hear. Samuel looked at her intently, not saying a word, but his eyes conveyed the gratitude of someone who wasn't sure whether they could trust anything or anyone. From that moment on, Mariana became the one responsible for taking care of Lucas during his long stays at the hospital. Every day, while his small body fought for survival, Mariana made sure to be there, staying by his side, speaking to him gently, offering not just medical care, but also a little bit of peace amid his pain. Though she felt a deep empathy for the child, she also sensed that something in her life was beginning to change, though she couldn't fully understand why. Something was happening to her own heart, something she wasn't ready to admit. The days went by, and despite her efforts, Samuel remained distant, lost in his thoughts, in his grief over Laura's death. Mariana didn't want to intrude, but something inside her urged her to get closer to him, to understand him, to see beyond the businessman who seemed so firm and self-assured. But Samuel was distant, locked away in his world of suffering and worry for his son. One Thursday afternoon, after a long day of work, Mariana was left alone with Lucas in the room, while Samuel was at a business meeting in town. The boy, who was beginning to feel a little better, looked at her with those big, curious eyes, as if he wanted to understand who this woman was, who had been taking care of him so kindly. In that moment, Lucas said something that made Mariana stop in her tracks. "Are you going to be my mom?" Mariana was speechless. The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. How could this child, with his fragile health, be thinking about something as big and definitive as a mother? And more importantly, how could she, a nurse devoted to her work, respond to that question with the honesty it deserved? She sat down beside him, unsure of what to say. She simply smiled at him, a tenderness she couldn't help but show. "You'll see in time, Lucas. All I can do is take care of you and do everything I can to help you." Though her answer was cautious, something inside her shifted. This child had a strength in his gaze that moved her deeply, and for a brief moment, Mariana saw herself as something more than just a nurse. She felt part of something bigger, something she couldn't explain, but was beginning to recognize in her heart. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence, but the silence was full of meaning, of unspoken feelings. Mariana didn't know it yet, but this encounter, this simple conversation, would mark the beginning of a story that would change everything for her. When Samuel returned to the hospital that night, he found his son asleep, and Mariana standing by the doorway, looking at the boy with an expression he couldn't read, but that something deep inside him recognized. The connection between them was starting to become deeper than he would have liked to admit. Mariana knew that her life would never be the same after that day. What had started as a simple job, a professional mission to care for a sick child, would soon become an emotional challenge that would test not just her profession, but her own limits. However, at that moment all she could do was move forward, not knowing what destiny had in store for her. The story had only just begun, and the surprises were only starting. Mariana never imagined that an 8-year-old boy could have such power over her emotions. Every time she entered Lucas's room, the little boy greeted her with a shy smile, but his eyes reflected a trust that confused her. Although her life as a nurse had made her capable of facing the worst in medicine, she had never had to confront something as deep and complex as what was beginning to happen inside her. It was Friday morning, and Lucas was in his room after a complicated treatment. Samuel, as usual, stood at the door, observing but not engaging in the conversation. It seemed that the weight of his grief over the death of his wife Laura was so heavy that even his son's well-being couldn't ease it. Mariana understood him, but that didn't make things any easier. One day, during her shift, Mariana was organizing the medical records when her desk phone rang. It was Samuel. "Mariana, how is Lucas?" he asked, his voice slightly cracked. "He's resting. The treatment was tough, but his recovery seems to be progressing well. However, we need to stay alert," Mariana replied. She noticed the tension in his voice, a fear that had lingered since Laura's death. She knew that Samuel didn't fully trust the hospital's doctors. His grief was so overwhelming that he couldn't help but feel helpless. "Samuel," Mariana continued, taking a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I know how hard this must be for you, but you have to let the process run its course. We're here to help." A long silence hung on the other end of the line. Finally, Samuel sighed. "I know, Mariana. I know you know, but I feel so lost." Mariana couldn't help but feel deep compassion for him. Though she kept her professionalism, something in her heart told her there was more between them, something that went beyond the doctor-patient relationship. "You're not alone, Samuel," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I'm here for you." The silence stretched even longer this time. Finally, Samuel replied, his voice sounding calmer. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." Mariana finished her shift with a strange feeling. Her heart was beating harder than ever. Something was changing in her life, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But she couldn't deny what she felt, what was happening between her and Samuel. That night, as she was leaving the hospital, Mariana received a text from her brother Hugo. "How's everything going, sis?" he had written. Mariana smiled as she read the message. Hugo, her older brother, had always been her support. He'd been with her through everything in life, even when things got tough. Without thinking twice, she replied, "I'm fine, but things are starting to get a little complicated. I think something's happening, and I don't know what to do." Hugo didn't take long to respond. "I know you, Mariana. You always know what to do. If you need to talk, I'm here. Just take care of yourself." Mariana put her phone away and leaned against her car. Just a few days ago, her life was simple. Now she found herself caught between her own feelings and the unreturned love of a father who had lost faith in life. But somehow, something inside her told her to keep moving forward. The sun was beginning to set when Mariana got home. She was tired, but there was something on her mind she couldn't ignore. That night, as she prepared to sleep, she thought about Samuel and Lucas. She thought about what she felt for both of them. What was there beyond her role as a nurse? The next day, Samuel arrived at the hospital looking more serious than usual. Lucas had had complications during the night, and he was visibly shaken. Mariana, as always, approached the boy with tenderness, and Samuel, without realizing it, watched every move she made. Lucas, upon seeing Mariana, smiled weakly. "Mariana, are you going to take care of me forever?" he asked, his voice soft. Mariana's heart skipped a beat. How could this boy, with so much suffering, find comfort in her? "I'll always be here, Lucas. Always," she replied, offering a smile that she hoped would be reassuring. But it wasn't just Lucas who needed answers. It was also her. Could she really continue in her professional life without questioning what these feelings for Samuel meant? The situation was becoming more and more confusing. Meanwhile, Samuel, though distant, couldn't stop watching Mariana. A complex feeling enveloped him. He didn't want to depend on anyone, but his son was improving, and Mariana seemed to be the only one who could truly help. Plus, there was something about her that attracted him, something he couldn't ignore, but at the same time, he couldn't afford to open his heart. So, between moments of hope and others of uncertainty, the relationship between Mariana and Samuel was beginning to grow more complicated. The emotions from both sides were mixing, and the line between the professional and the personal was starting to blur. The challenge was about to begin, and both knew their lives would never be the same. As the days went by, the connection between Mariana and Samuel became more palpable. Every time their paths crossed, there was something in the air, a tension that both tried to ignore, but that was impossible to deny. Mariana knew her bond with Lucas was something special, but she also began to wonder if, deep down, she wasn't looking for something more profound with Samuel, the man who had lost his wife, who seemed so distant and broken, yet now trusted her. One afternoon, after a particularly tough day with Lucas, Mariana was walking through the hospital hallways when Samuel caught up to her. His quick steps echoed through the quiet of the hospital, and Mariana, upon hearing them, turned to see him approaching. "Mariana, we need to talk," he said, getting straight to the point. His tone was firm, but also loaded with a vulnerability he rarely showed. Mariana watched him cautiously, something in his voice unsettling her. "What's going on, Samuel?" she asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. She didn't know what to expect. "It's about Lucas, and about us," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for him, for me, for our family. But there's something I'm having a hard time accepting." Mariana furrowed her brow, unsure whether to be afraid of those words or to stay calm. Samuel had been open about his grief over the death of Laura, his wife, but he had never spoken about what he really thought about his relationship with her. "What do you mean?" she asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Samuel looked at her intently, as if trying to find the right words. I think I'm starting to feel something for you, Mariana," he said sincerely, as if the words weighed heavily on him. Mariana's world seemed to stop for a moment. She felt a mix of surprise and confusion. She hadn't expected to hear those words from him. Samuel had always been so reserved, so much in his own world, that the fact that he was opening up like this left her speechless. "Samuel," she began, but the words wouldn't come out the way she wanted. I feel the same way, but I don't know if this is what you really need." Samuel looked into her eyes, and for a moment, the silence between them was deafening. Finally, he spoke again. "I know this isn't ideal. I know I don't fully understand everything yet, but I can't keep ignoring what I feel." His tone softened, almost pleading. Mariana sighed, her thoughts tangled. There was something about Samuel that attracted her, but she also felt a deep respect for her role as a nurse and Lucas's caregiver. Allowing any other type of relationship could complicate everything, especially when emotions were already running so high between them. "I don't want this to affect Lucas's health," she said finally, her voice sounding firmer than she felt. "We need to stay focused on his well-being." Samuel nodded slowly, but his eyes held something more, an emotion that mixed hope with fear. He understood Mariana's words, but at the same time, his heart couldn't ignore the connection that had formed between them. The next day, Mariana arrived at the hospital with a heavy heart, not just because of the uncertain future she shared with Samuel, but because of something even more unsettling. Something inside her told her that her life was about to take yet another unexpected turn. As she reviewed Lucas's medical records, she felt a sudden dizziness and had to steady herself on the work table. The symptoms were brief, but intense enough to worry her. She decided to brush it off, thinking it was just accumulated stress, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That afternoon, as Samuel and Mariana were talking about Lucas's condition in his room, something in his gaze shifted. "Mariana, why don't you take a break?" Samuel suggested, his tone concerned. "You look exhausted." Mariana looked at him, surprised. Could it be that he cared about her like this? All this time, she had been focused on caring for Lucas, but now something had changed. Samuel had shown a side of himself she hadn't expected. "Maybe I should," she replied with a sigh, but something inside her resisted. She knew she couldn't just walk away from everything so easily. And then something more important happened. Lucas, who had been resting in his bed, looked up at them and, with his soft and hesitant voice, said, "Mariana, are you going to be my mum?" Lucas's words hit Mariana like a wave. Samuel stood frozen. No one had said it out loud, but the boy had expressed it with such pure innocence that it left everyone speechless. Mariana glanced at Samuel, unsure of how to respond. Lucas's question had exposed something neither of them was ready to face. What had begun as a simple nurse-patient bond now seemed to be the beginning of something much larger. "Mariana, are you going to be my mum?" The silence that followed was so deep that the sound of Lucas's monitors seemed louder than usual. Mariana's eyes widened as she looked at Samuel, searching for some sign of how to react. He, in turn, appeared as surprised as she was, his gaze fixed on his son, as if he couldn't process what he had just heard. "Lucas, Mariana leaned down, gently holding his small hand. "I will always be here for you, I promise." The boy smiled faintly, as if that was all he needed to hear. His face showed a serenity that hadn't been there in days. Mariana felt a lump in her throat, unsure if she had said the right thing, but also unsure if there even was a right answer to that. He was just a child, yet his words had stirred a whirlwind of emotions inside her. Samuel cleared his throat, walking over to the window, where he stood in silence for several seconds. Mariana watched him out of the corner of her eye, wondering what he was thinking. Was he upset? Confused? Or perhaps feeling the same way she did? The tension in the air was palpable. That night, while Mariana was reviewing some medical files in the nurse's station, she suddenly felt a strong dizziness. This time, it was more intense than before. Her vision blurred, and she had to sit down quickly. Her breathing became irregular, and for a moment she thought she might faint. "Are you okay?" Louisa, one of the night shift nurses, asked as she approached with a worried expression. Yeah. I think it's just exhaustion," Mariana replied, trying to sound calm. But she knew something was wrong. It wasn't just fatigue. "It doesn't seem like just exhaustion, Mariana. You should get checked out." "Maybe," she said, feigning nonchalance, but doubt began to grow in her mind. The next morning, Mariana decided to get some routine tests done. She didn't tell anyone, not even Samuel. She didn't want to alarm anyone without cause, but deep down, a part of her already knew the truth. She waited in the lab's waiting room, her heart pounding. She felt like something important was about to be revealed. Hours later, she received a call. The voice of the doctor on the other end of the line was calm, but her words were anything but. "Mariana, the results are in. We need you to come in person to discuss them." "Is it bad?" she asked, her voice trembling, already sensing what was coming. "Not necessarily, but it's important we talk face to face." Fear settled in Mariana's chest, but she couldn't afford to break down. That afternoon, she took a break from her shift and went to see the doctor. She sat across from the doctor, who was holding a folder with the results in her hand. The doctor looked up, smiled reassuringly, and delivered the news clearly and directly. "Mariana, you're pregnant." Mariana's world stopped. Her mind filled with questions, her body tensed, and a million thoughts assaulted her all at once. She couldn't believe it. Not now, not in the midst of all this. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Completely sure. The hormone levels are clear. You're a few weeks pregnant," the doctor replied calmly. Mariana placed a hand on her abdomen, as if by simply touching it, she could understand the magnitude of the news. How had this happened? The answer was obvious, but what she didn't know was how to face it. And above all, how would she tell Samuel? The ride back to the hospital was a whirlwind of emotions. She thought about Lucas, about Samuel, about everything that was happening. Her life had changed so much since she became part of this family, and now it seemed like it was about to change even more. Doubts tormented her. How would Samuel react? Would he think she did this on purpose? Would he think she was trying to trap him with a child? When she arrived at the hospital, the first person she saw was Samuel. He was at the reception, speaking with a receptionist, but as soon as he saw her, his eyes locked onto her. He walked over with concern written on his face. "Where have you been? I couldn't find you all shift," he said, furrowing his brow as if worried. "I had to take care of some personal matters," she replied evasively, feeling that if she told him the truth, her whole world would crumble. Samuel noticed her discomfort, but didn't press the issue. "Lucas has been asking about you," he said, with a half smile. "Seems like he misses you more than he wants to admit." "I'll go see him now," she responded, offering a forced smile, trying to ignore the storm brewing inside her. She entered Lucas's room and found him playing with puzzles on his bed. When he saw her, the boy smiled immediately. "Mariana, where were you?" he asked, a mix of joy and accusation in his voice. "I just had to run a few errands, champ," she said, sitting beside him. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, but I missed you." Mariana looked at him, and for a moment, the weight of her situation hit her full force. Lucas already saw her as a mother, and now, with the news of her pregnancy, she couldn't help but feel that fate was playing some strange joke on her. Could she be a mother to Lucas and to another child at the same time? The thought overwhelmed her, but she also felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, in some way, this was part of her destiny. That night, at home, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, thinking about how she would tell Samuel the truth. Would she tell him immediately? Or wait? But one thing was clear. She couldn't hide it for long. The next morning, Samuel was in Lucas's room, playing with him while sunlight streamed through the window. It was a beautiful picture, but it also reminded her of what was at stake. If she told him, she could lose everything. Samuel might think it was all a mistake, but if she didn't tell him, the truth would eventually come out. As she watched them, she took a deep breath, feeling an inner strength she didn't know she had. She wasn't afraid of the truth. She had faced harder things in life, and this time wouldn't be any different. "Samuel, I need to talk to you," she said firmly. Samuel looked up, his expression turning serious, and nodded. "Sure. What's it about?" he asked, setting the puzzle aside. Mariana looked him in the eyes, her heart pounding in her throat, but she didn't look away. "I'm pregnant, Samuel," she said without hesitation. Samuel's eyes widened in shock. The surprise was evident on his face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Mariana, then at Lucas, then back at her. For a moment, the whole world seemed to freeze. "Is it mine?" he asked, almost in a whisper, as if afraid of the answer. "Yes, Samuel, it's yours," she replied, her voice steady. Silence fell over the room again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of truths that couldn't be ignored. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and violet, as Mariana stood by the window, staring at the horizon with her thoughts adrift. The evening air filtered in gently, but she couldn't feel anything other than the weight of the uncertainty that had settled in her chest. She had revealed what she had feared, and now the calm she had expected was nowhere to be found. Samuel hadn't said anything since her confession. His reaction had been so silent and heavy that it felt like the air in the room had frozen. Mariana had looked him in the eyes, waiting for a response, but he simply stood there, mouth agape, unable to speak. Finally, after a long silence, Samuel let out a deep sigh and, with a weary gesture, ran his hand through his hair. He walked toward Mariana with a look that blended confusion and concern. How could you not tell me earlier?" he asked, his voice wavering as though struggling to believe what he had just heard. Mariana breathed deeply, feeling that her words were insufficient to explain everything that had been going through her mind. How could she explain the fear she felt? The fear of ruining everything, of losing him, of losing Lucas. Everything had gotten so complicated in such a short time. "Samuel, it wasn't easy," she replied in a whisper. "I don't know how to tell you this, but this wasn't planned. I have no idea what to do." He looked at her for a moment, as though searching for an answer in her face. Finally, he sighed again, letting the air calm his nerves. "And what do you want, Mariana?" he asked, with an unexpected seriousness. "Because what's clear is that this changes everything." Mariana looked at him, unsure of what to say. She didn't have an answer. The truth was, she didn't know what she wanted. The news of her pregnancy had shaken her so deeply that she couldn't think clearly. The only thing she knew for certain was that she didn't want to lose Samuel or Lucas. But the truth was, everything had just become even more complicated. "The only thing I know, Samuel, is that I don't regret what I've done for Lucas," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I love him, and I love him more than ever. And if this means I have to change my life, I will. But I'm scared." Silence fell again. Samuel moved closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, but with a strength that conveyed reassurance. "Mariana, I'm scared too," he said with a deep sigh. "But I want you to know that this baby is part of our story now." Those words, so simple and direct, penetrated Mariana deeply. She didn't know if things were going to turn out well. She didn't know if she could handle everything life was asking of her, but in that moment, something inside her began to calm. If Samuel was willing to face it, maybe she could too. "Thank you, Samuel," she whispered, her heart beating more calmly. "Thank you for not walking away." A small step had been taken, but many questions still remained. How would Lucas react when he found out the truth? How would they handle the changes ahead? And what would happen with Clara, Samuel's mother, who had been so resistant to Mariana's presence in her son's life? However, at that moment, with the night falling around them, Mariana felt more certain than ever that she wasn't alone. Samuel had taken a step toward her, and now she too had to move forward, trusting in what was to come. The brief peace didn't last long. Suddenly the sound of the phone broke the silence. It was a message from Hugo, her brother, who knew about the situation and had been supporting her every step of the way. Mariana read it aloud. "I know this is hard, sis, but whatever you decide, don't do it alone. I'm with you always." Hugo's words gave her strength. Mariana felt like she could face anything, as long as she was willing to accept it. Life had never been easy for her, but she had learned to fight for what she loved. And now, all she had to do was keep moving forward. Meanwhile, in Lucas's room, the boy was sleeping peacefully, unaware of everything that was happening. Mariana looked at him through the slightly open door, her heart full of love. She knew that no matter what happened, she would always be there for him, and that from this moment on, their lives would be different. But the most important thing was that they would move forward together, as a family. The story of Mariana, Samuel, and Lucas was just beginning, and though the future was uncertain, there was one thing that united them, a love that, despite the hardships, would make them stronger. And in that love, Mariana found the strength to face whatever came next. The sun was shining brightly over the city, but in Samuel's house, the atmosphere was heavy and tense. For the past few days, Mariana had tried not to think about what was coming, but this morning something was bothering her. It wasn't just the uncertainty about her future, or even the new life growing inside her. No. What truly made her nervous was the imminent arrival of Clara, Samuel's mother. Since Mariana and Samuel had started getting closer, Clara had never approved of their relationship. At first, it had been a subtle disapproval, almost imperceptible. But over time, Clara's criticisms had become more direct and aggressive, fueled by a mother who couldn't accept the idea of her son being with another woman, especially someone who wasn't in her league. The ring of the phone broke the silence in the house. Mariana looked at the screen and felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was Samuel. "Mariana!" Samuel's voice sounded tense and worried. "My mum will be here in a couple of hours. She's on her way." Mariana felt her heart race. She knew what that meant, the return of the woman who had done everything in her power to separate them. "I know," she responded, her voice calm but filled with fear. "I've been preparing." Although her tone seemed composed, inside her, an internal battle raged. How would she face Clara? How could she prove that despite coming from a completely different background, she was worthy of being by Samuel's side, and therefore worthy of Lucas? Anxiety washed over her. Despite Samuel's reassuring words over the past few days, the fear that Clara would undo everything they had worked for grew with each passing minute. A few hours later, the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house alerted Mariana. She looked out the window and saw Clara getting out of the vehicle. Her tall, elegant figure, with perfectly styled hair and an air of authority, sent a chill down Mariana's spine. She knew that this woman would stop at nothing to keep her son away from her. What would she do now? "Mariana!" Clara's voice made her jump. Samuel's mother was standing at the door, staring at the nurse with a cold, almost defiant expression. "I've been waiting to speak with you." Mariana, though startled, quickly composed herself and offered a tense smile. She knew she had to be strong. "Of course, Clara," she responded, maintaining her calm. "It's a pleasure to have you in our home." Clara looked at her with disdain, as if her presence there were an invasion. She couldn't help but feel that every word from Mariana was irritating her. She couldn't believe her son was allowing a woman so common to be so deeply involved in his life. "Look, Mariana," Clara said, crossing her arms, "I've been watching you from the start, and while you may have earned a place in Lucas's life, I have a hard time believing you're really what my son needs." Mariana swallowed hard, but didn't let her voice tremble. Samuel and I have talked about this a lot, she responded, trying to keep the conversation civil. And what I want, Clara, is the best for everyone, especially for Lucas. Clara studied her for a long moment, and for a second, Mariana thought the conversation might take a less hostile turn. But then Clara's gaze hardened, and her words became colder than ever. "If you think everything is going to be easy, you're very wrong," Clara said, her tone sharp. "You're not part of this family, and you won't be. I won't allow it." Those words hit Mariana like a punch. No matter how much she tried to prove her intentions were pure, Clara would never see it that way. The competition was unfair. A powerful mother, a wealthy family, a past full of achievements versus a young nurse without the backing Clara thought necessary. "I won't allow it," Clara repeated, almost as a threat. Mariana closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find some calm. She knew the battle had only just begun, and for Samuel, things wouldn't be easy. In fact, he was in the middle of a tug-of-war, torn between his love for Mariana and the loyalty he felt toward his mother. Then, Mariana said in a calm voice, "I think this is something that Samuel and I need to decide together." Clara frowned, clearly irritated by Mariana's response. She didn't want to lose control of the situation, but Mariana had taken a decisive step. At least for now, she wasn't willing to give in. Just then, Lucas appeared in the doorway, his innocent and radiant smile lighting up his face. "Hi, Grandma Clara," Lucas said enthusiastically, running over to embrace Samuel's mother. Clara, seeing her grandson, lowered her guard for a moment. Her expression softened, and for a brief second, Mariana saw a glimmer of the loving mother Clara had once been. But the peace was short-lived. Clara looked back at Mariana, her gaze as intense as ever, as though her presence were a threat. "This is going to be a war, Mariana," Clara said, without mincing words. "And I will always win." The calm after the storm of Clara's arrival quickly faded. Although for a brief moment Mariana had felt that maybe finally the waters would calm, she soon realized how wrong she had been. Clara was not a woman who let things resolve so easily. With each passing day, her presence became more oppressive. Mariana tried to keep herself busy at the hospital, immersed in her work. But the pressure of what was happening at home followed her like a shadow. Every time she met with Samuel, the atmosphere between them was tense. Samuel was caught between his love for his mother and the affection he felt for Mariana. While he felt the need to protect his son and family, he also knew something big was happening between him and Mariana. However, he could not ignore Clara's constant interference, who never missed an opportunity to create friction. One day, while Mariana was attending to one of her patients at the hospital, her phone buzzed with a message from Samuel. At first, she thought it might be an encouraging message or some comforting words to help her bear the situation. However, when she read it, her face darkened with concern. "Mariana, we need to talk. There's something I can't keep ignoring." The message was brief, but the urgency in his tone made her think that something serious was going on. Mariana hurried to finish her shift and, with her heart racing, made her way to Samuel's house. When she arrived, she saw that the lights were off, but a small crack in the window allowed her to see the shadows of the three of them in the living room. She entered cautiously and saw Samuel sitting on the couch with Lucas hugging his side. Clara was in the corner of the room, watching with a defiant gaze. "What's going on?" Mariana asked, her voice trembling slightly. She knew the situation was about to escalate. Samuel looked at her intently, his face weary. He slowly stood up from the couch, leaving Lucas in his place. "Mariana, there's something I haven't told you," he said in a serious tone. "My mother has been looking into your past, and what she found isn't good." Mariana tensed. She knew her past was not easy to talk about. She'd grown up in a humble family, and despite her passion for medicine, she had had to fight every day to get where she was. But what Clara had done was completely unjust. "What did she find?" Mariana asked, though she already suspected the answer. Clara stepped forward, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's not just that," Clara said. "Mariana, you don't belong in this world. Your family has no money, you don't have a proper education, and now you don't even know how to handle being a mother." Clara's words were like daggers, but Mariana stood firm. She couldn't let herself be attacked without defending herself. "I've worked my whole life to get here," she said, her voice steady. "And I know exactly what it's like to fight for what I want. I don't need anyone to tell me what I'm worth." Clara looked at her with contempt, but didn't respond. Samuel remained silent, his head lowered, clearly tormented by the situation. "And Lucas?" Mariana asked, looking at the little boy who was watching the conversation from the couch. "What about him?" Clara crossed her arms. "Lucas doesn't understand what's happening, but I do. And I won't let you ruin my son's life." The tension in the room was palpable. Mariana felt the weight of Clara's words pressing on her chest. She knew that her relationship with Samuel was on the brink of falling apart. But something inside her told her that she had to keep going. "Samuel, what are you going to do?" Mariana asked, turning to him. Samuel slowly stood up and walked toward Mariana. His face was marked by confusion, but there was something else in his eyes, a mixture of pain and doubt. "I don't know what to do," he finally said. "But I know I have to do something. I don't want to lose you, Mariana. I don't want to lose Lucas. But this isn't easy." Mariana looked at him, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. She knew that, like her, Samuel was caught between his mother and his love for them, but she couldn't let it all fall apart. "You don't have to lose me, Samuel," she said softly. "We just have to be strong." Clara watched the scene with anger. It was clear that she wasn't going to give up easily, but Mariana was willing to fight for her place in this family, for the love that had grown between her and Samuel, and for Lucas's future. The conversation was interrupted when Lucas got up from the couch and walked over to Mariana, taking her hand in his little embrace. "Mariana, why are you crying?" he asked, with the innocence only a child could have. Mariana smiled weakly, hugging Lucas with all her heart. "I'm not crying, Lucas," she replied, her voice cracked. "I'm fighting for you, for both of us." The tension in Samuel's house did not subside. Every day felt like a battlefield, with Mariana fighting to keep her place, while Clara relentlessly attacked everything that represented the young nurse's life. The weight of the situation was even affecting Lucas, who no longer understood why his mom couldn't stay with them without his grandmother getting in the way. Samuel, though trying to mediate, found himself more and more divided. He couldn't ignore the deep love he felt for Mariana, but his mother had taught him from a young age that family should be united by blood, not by the will of a woman who, in his eyes, was a stranger. The days passed slowly, and the sense that the love that had brought them together was crumbling became more palpable. One morning, Mariana woke up with the feeling that something had changed. The air, though warm, carried a heaviness that was hard to ignore. At the hospital, the news about her health was better than expected, but in her heart, there was an unease she couldn't calm. When she arrived at Samuel's house that afternoon, she found an odd atmosphere. Everything was silent, as if something was about to happen. "Samuel!" she called cautiously, stepping into the living room. There was no response. Mariana went further into the house, searching for Samuel. It was then that she found the letter. It was on the table, with her name written in large letters and handwriting she didn't recognize. The letter wasn't from Samuel, but something inside her told her she needed to open it. With trembling hands, Mariana unfolded the paper and began to read. Mariana, if you are reading this, you already know what has happened. I can no longer be a spectator in your life. Samuel is my son, and I raised him to be the man he is today. I cannot allow you, a woman who doesn't understand the importance of family and honor, to destroy what I have spent my whole life building. I have been working on a plan to remove you from Samuel and Lucas's life, whether you believe it or not. You are not part of this family, and you never will be. Your place is in the hospital, not among us. I suggest you take your path before the consequences are worse. Don't doubt it. What is at stake is much bigger than you imagine. Clara, Mariana stood frozen. She couldn't believe what she had just read. Every word from Clara was like a knife to the heart. The woman who had tried to protect everything she loved now seemed determined to destroy her life. But how could Samuel not know what his mother was doing? Doubt began to gnaw at her, though she forced herself not to give in to fear. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Samuel appeared in the doorway with a tired expression, as if he had been awake all night. "What's going on?" he asked, seeing the letter in Mariana's hands. Mariana looked at him, her heart full of questions, but also with a contained anger she couldn't disguise. "Samuel, is this what your mother is doing?" she said, her voice trembling. "Is this what she thinks of me?" Samuel swallowed hard, his face turning pale. I didn't know anything about this," he said, his voice broken. "My mother never showed me anything like this." Mariana took a deep breath, feeling a wave of sadness and disillusionment flood over her. She loved him deeply, but she couldn't keep fighting for something that seemed destined to fail. "How could you let this go so far?" she asked, trying to hold back tears. Lucas, who had been in the hallway, appeared at that moment with a worried look on his small face. Seeing the tension in the room, he ran to Mariana and hugged her. "Why are you fighting?" he asked softly, looking at both of them. Mariana crouched down to his level and gave him a weak smile, though inside her heart was breaking. "We're not fighting, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking. "We're just trying to understand each other." But Lucas, as only children can, sensed the distress in the air. He walked over to Samuel and looked at him intently. "Dad, why can't we be a family?" he asked, with an innocent sadness that struck deep in Samuel's heart. His son's words echoed in Samuel's ears like a blow. What had he done? How had he allowed the situation to get this far? Unable to answer, he simply hugged Lucas, seeking in him the answer he didn't know how to find. Mariana stood up and looked out the window. The internal struggle she felt left her exhausted, and though she loved Samuel, she didn't know if it was worth continuing to fight in such a thorn-filled battleground. At that moment, Samuel approached her, and for the first time in a long while, their eyes met without barriers. "Mariana, I don't know what to do. I'm lost," he said desperately. "But I promise you, I won't let my mother destroy everything we've built." Mariana looked at him intently, recognizing in his words the love that still remained between them. But she also understood that everything was about to change, and that the truth of what was happening in their family would now require a courage they never imagined they'd have. Samuel's house felt colder than ever. The echoes of Clara's words still reverberated through the hallways, enveloping everyone in a palpable tension. Mariana didn't know how much more she could endure. With each passing day, the wound in her heart grew larger, and her mind couldn't stop questioning if what she had been searching for was really worth it. Samuel, for his part, found himself trapped between his love for Mariana and his fear of losing his mother, and with her, the bond he had always had with her. Clara's letter had left a deep mark on his soul. Though he had sworn to Mariana that he wouldn't let his mother destroy what they were building, His mother's words haunted him. It was hard to believe, but there was something inside him that told him he might have been blinded by love, that perhaps his mother was right. Every time he thought of Lucas, a new wave of guilt overwhelmed him. Could he really continue with Mariana and risk his son's well-being? Lucas had already suffered enough. What if his relationship with Mariana was yet another obstacle in his life? The next day seemed to drag on endlessly. Both Mariana and Samuel had spent the night restless, anxious, thinking about the uncertain future hanging over them. When she finally woke up, Mariana decided she could no longer bear the anguish. She needed a clear answer, an action that would free them from this cycle of pain and confusion. That day, Samuel decided he couldn't wait any longer for things to resolve on their own. He went out to the street with the determination to speak to his mother, confront her, and put an end to her manipulations. It was his last chance to prove to Mariana and Lucas that he was willing to fight for his family. But before he could reach Clara's house, a message from Mariana changed everything. In the message, she asked him to meet her at the hospital, saying there was something important she needed to discuss with him. The tension grew even more. What could be so urgent? Samuel started to feel more uneasy than ever. He hurried to the hospital, but the journey there seemed endless. When he arrived, Mariana was waiting for him in the small break room. Her eyes, which had once radiated hope and love, were now clouded with uncertainty. "What's going on, Mariana?" Samuel asked, his expression tense. She looked at him for a moment as if she were making a crucial decision. She knew that this moment would define the rest of their lives. "I'm pregnant, Samuel," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. Samuel couldn't stop the shock that washed over him. Pregnant? How could this be possible? While pregnancy wasn't something they had planned for, he couldn't ignore the complexity of the situation. "I don't know what to do, Samuel," Mariana continued. "I wasn't ready for this, but I don't want to run away from you, or from Lucas, or from what we've built." Samuel looked at her with a mix of astonishment and pain. For a moment he thought his world was crumbling around him, but then something shifted inside him. Suddenly, he realized that this child wasn't just a new challenge, it was a new opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild their family, to give Lucas the stability he needed, and to show Mariana that he was willing to fight for her. "Mariana, Samuel began, but he couldn't find the right words. She smiled, though her eyes still reflected uncertainty. "I know, Samuel. We don't have all the answers, but if we don't fight for this, we'll never do it," Mariana said, her gaze fixed on him. "We can make it work." In that instant, Samuel understood that his love for Mariana, for his son, and for the future they could build together, outweighed any obstacle or fear. This child wasn't an impediment, but a symbol of everything they had achieved so far. Without saying another word, Samuel embraced Mariana, holding her with the strength of a man determined to do whatever it took for his family. Lucas, who had been watching from the door, smiled when he saw them embracing. He didn't understand everything that had happened, but he knew something good was taking place. The battle for their family wasn't over, but for the first time, they all seemed ready to face whatever would come next. The morning sun gently filtered through the hospital window, illuminating Mariana's face. After days of uncertainty, she was beginning to find peace. Samuel sat beside her, watching his wife as if he had never seen her so clearly before. The news of the pregnancy had been a hard blow, but it had also sparked a glimmer of hope in their hearts. The child they were expecting wasn't just a new member of the family, he was also a symbol of their rebirth, a reminder that love could overcome any adversity. The following days were intense, filled with decisions and adjustments. Samuel had finally understood that his life with Mariana would not be easy, but together they could build something solid. He was no longer the man who feared uncertainty. Now he was a father determined to do whatever it took to protect his family. His relationship with his mother, Clara, however, was still far from being resolved. Though his heart wished for things to be different, Samuel knew that his loyalty had to lie with his wife and child. One day, while at home, Samuel gathered his courage and decided to confront his mother. He could no longer ignore the rift between them. He needed Clara to understand that his family now included Mariana and the baby. "Mother, we need to talk," he said firmly as Clara received him at her house. Clara, who had not spoken to him for days, looked at him coldly. "I know, Samuel. I know what you're going to say, but I don't think it's right. Mariana isn't for you," she replied, her disgust unmasked. Samuel took a deep breath. He knew this conversation would not be easy, but it was necessary. "I respect you, Mother, but Mariana is part of my life, and this baby is part of my family. I don't want you interfering with our happiness anymore," he said, locking eyes with Clara. There was a long silence. Finally, Clara let out a sigh of resignation. Though her heart still opposed it, something inside her told her that maybe, just maybe, her son was right. Perhaps, after all, his happiness could be with Mariana. "I don't want to lose you, son. But I ask you not to expect me to accept everything right away. This is hard for me and you know it," Clara replied, her tone softer, though still reluctant. Samuel nodded, understanding his mother's pain. He knew that time would be the only remedy to heal old wounds, but the important thing was that at least he hadn't lost her. Meanwhile at home, Lucas was happier than ever. Though still a child, he sensed that something good was happening. He saw his father and Mariana together and felt in his heart that finally their family was complete. One day after school, he ran home, a radiant smile on his face. "Dad, Mariana, the doctor said I can do sports like all the other kids. I'm better!" he exclaimed, unable to contain his excitement. Mariana and Samuel looked at each other, their hearts beating as one, relieved to see Lucas finally beginning to enjoy a fuller life. The love between the three of them was palpable. Mariana's pregnancy was progressing smoothly, and despite the difficulties they had faced, both knew that life had given them a new chance. Mariana, for her part, had left her doubts behind. She had found in Samuel not only a partner, but someone willing to share with her not only the joys, but also the challenges life would throw their way. The day of the birth arrived sooner than expected. Mariana, nervous but determined, was preparing to bring their child into the world. Samuel, by her side, couldn't stop smiling. They both knew that from that moment on, their lives would never be the same. When the baby was born, a small and healthy boy, Samuel's tears couldn't be held back. Mariana, with a smile full of love, embraced their child, while Lucas, from the corner of the room, watched with the innocence only a child could have. "Dad, Mariana, can I call him brother?" Lucas asked shyly. The question left everyone silent for a moment. Then Samuel and Mariana looked at each other, and in that instant, they knew that everything they had gone through up until that point had led them to this miracle of family. "Of course, Lucas, he's your brother," Samuel answered, his voice choked. Mariana smiled, feeling the weight of her heart completely lifted. All she had feared, all the obstacles she thought she couldn't overcome, had been worth it. Together, as a family, they would face whatever came their way. And though they knew adversities would continue, they also knew that love would keep them united. With the birth of their son, with Lucas now healthy and happy, and with Samuel by her side, Mariana understood what it truly meant to be a mother, not just because of the blood that ran through her veins, but because of the deep connection with her child and the family they had decided to build. The story of Mariana, Samuel, Lucas, and the new baby was no longer just a story of struggles and losses. It was one of rebirth, of a family united by unconditional love. Everything they had gone through, all the trials they had faced, had only served to strengthen their bond. And so they finally understood that love knows no boundaries. And so we come to the end of this beautiful journey of love, overcoming, and unity. Mariana, Samuel, and Lucas have taught us that even though the path may be difficult, what truly matters is unconditional love and the strength of family. Their story shows us that we can always find happiness when we have the people we love by our side. Now I want to know your opinion. What do you think of Mariana's decision to continue with the pregnancy despite her fears and doubts? Do you think it was the right decision? Leave me your comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it to support our channel, subscribe so you don't miss our next exciting stories, and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. Every comment and every interaction from you is very important to us. Thank you so much for being here, and until the next video where we'll bring you more stories that will touch your heart. See you soon.